All right. Thanks, everybody, for joining us for the Empirical Enlightenment podcast. I'm here with Mandy. We're going to talk a little bit about her techniques, her methods, kind of you don't have to use mushrooms to kind of get a bit of a trip. And she's the author of When I Feel Alone. It's a book kind of discussing how she was able to escape a cult and kind of how she evolved into who she is today. So if you wouldn't mind introducing yourself, Mandy, you have the mic.
Awesome. Okay. I'm Mandy Valadez. So I escaped this cult-like organization in 2018, and today I focus a lot on healing the parts of ourselves that were pushed aside. I call these the shadow parts. And one of the methods that I use is through this specific non-mushroom experience that I like to say is compared to something like that. But I use it to go inward inside of, the spirit, the soul, and to see what messages can be sent to us, and it speaks to us. And the method that I use has done a lot to help others in that regard. So I truly stand firm on, the benefits of it.
Oh, that's awesome. So, what kind of benefits have you seen by doing it? Maxie, maybe first of all, kind of discuss what it is and what kind of people would benefit from it and what benefits they get.
The many that I have already conducted has proven to me that this experience definitely goes deeper than what like even people can feel even during the experience, because the effects go beyond like weeks and months after. A lot of these people are those that are wanting to go beyond the human experience. I guess a lot of people would do that who connect with plant medicine, but it wants to go, they want to go beyond the earth human experience and see what's inside, like what is going on inside. And these are people that may be dealing with not only just like their shadow, like I said, or like shadow or trauma, but those that have already gotten to a place where they feel more safe in their body. They feel, they're not really going through the trauma any longer. They're now going, they're past that, but they feel they're dealing with the after effects. They're dealing with
Mm.
episodes that, like personally for me, when I escaped this traumatic environment, I did not understand the after effects until I started noticing that I myself could not experience happiness. There was just something that I was numb to happiness. Like I could feel depression, I could feel the sadness, I could feel the confusion. But when it came to happiness, it was like I couldn't really embody that happiness. And so a lot of my clients are coming to me with wanting to go beyond whatever it is that they may be experiencing, and they want to feel more. Like, can I feel more? Like, is there more of an experience where I can feel an acceptance with myself, where I can be alone or feel alone, but still be okay in that experience? And that's where that ebook came from, is when I feel alone, like what then? You know what I mean? When you find yourself at this place where maybe you don't have a lot of support, or you escaped an environment where now you're having to discover who you are, and you don't even know who you are. And so with this experience, you're able to find that out. You're able to find out who you are under the shadow, the trauma, the pain, the suffering, the questions that we have as a human. You're going into the spirit. And when you can go into the spirit, you can now, I feel like you can find answers, you can find solutions, you can embody the yourself more than like the pain and the suffering. You know what I mean? So like you can go beyond that, and you can see yourself at this higher point of view. You look down and you go, oh, okay, there I am. This is what I went through, the suffering, the pain, the trauma, my story, right? Your story that you have, and it's like we're validating that. And you get to see that from this point of view. And in this experience, you get this power of like who you can be. and who you are here to be, and that's worthy, and that's like, it just brings so much validation. And through that, you're able to work through whatever it is that you may be dealing with. And in an hour experience that we have in this healing that I call an ancestral healing, um in the hour session with me, you're able to process years of whatever it is that you went through, your storyline. In that hour session, we are just going through all of that. But it doesn't feel like it's rapid. So that's the thing. It doesn't feel rushed, even though it sounds like it would be rushed. It's almost like time stops, and it's like, it's not, it feels like you did 4 hours, but it was only an hour. But I feel like that's you being in your spirit instead
Mm,
of compared to human timing. In your spirit, there is no time. So you're actually able to get more things cleared, healed, recharged than you would in like regular time. And the benefits that they receive is just acceptance, but also an understanding of who they have been through their bloodline. And I know that
yeah,
that gets a little confusing, but because we are who we are today because of our ancestors.
yeah,
You didn't come here, like, you didn't just one day wake up and you were here. Are here because of those who came before you as a human. And that's why it works, I feel, because you're going in and you're speaking through these specific ancestors that carry answers for you. Like, I can't give you those answers, but they can. These ancestors from like decades and centuries ago, they literally can give you messages that will empower you, that can heal you in an hour, because of the answers that they hold for you, that you can't really get anywhere else, because you're literally here. If there is a God, it's your ancestors, because your ancestors created you. I mean,
right.
right? Like, human wise, right? Like, not, I'm not talking about your spirit, but like human wise, like, you are here because of generations of whoever your bloodline is. And in these healings, it's almost, that's the trip. The trip is, we're going into the bloodline to see who was here before you, to see what stories you are carrying that are theirs, but you're like carrying you're holding on to these stories, and they're going to release you. They're going to release you because in this trip, you're basically saying, like, I don't want to carry I don't want to carry what's not mine.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, I'm a biochemist by trade, and I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of epigenetics, but there was an old theory of evolution by a guy named Lamarck, and I'm going to get to my point. I won't ramble too much, but everybody thought he was crazy because his theory was um, that creatures could kind of alter who they are and their genetics during their lifetime, right? And Darwin came along and he was like, "No, this is wrong. It's in the DNA, and you can't alter your DNA while you're alive. I mean, you can have mutations and things like that, but for the most part, it's natural selection." Anyway, a couple hundred years later, a concept called epigenetics comes along, which basically says that it, depending on what you do during your life, you can modify what genes get read. And so it's not modifying DNA itself, but it's modifying what gets read. And what's interesting is that gets passed on. So um, your kids, depending on what you do in life, those epigenetic markers get passed on. So what gets read, what doesn't. And so as you were talking, it made me think, like, connecting to your ancestors. You do have those epigenetic marks. So, like, who you are is not just your DNA, it's what your ancestors did. And so it does actually tap into who who you are, what they did, and for better or worse, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the concept of generational trauma, they've shown children who are abused. they have much more. It's called it's called methylation, but they have different markers than children who aren't abused. And then when they have kids, that same thing happens, right? And it's because of this epigenetics that it keeps going. It's this generational trauma, but it can be good or bad, right?
Right.
And so this whole tapping into your ancestors thing, it's not as woo woo as people would think. I think it's actually something that um, is embedded in your code, right? And so accessing it, probably the only way to do it is through the mind, the subconscious, that kind of thing. Um, but I, I think it would be something very difficult to prove, but because it's so like deep in there, and they're just a lot of this stuff is brand new science and that kind of stuff. But no, it definitely your ancestors influence who you are today, and if you can kind of tap into that, that would be extremely beneficial. um,
Yeah.
I've been reading this book called Rituals, and when you're talking about the cult, uh, I think they those cults tap into something very primal, where we are spiritual, we are religious creatures, and there's some people who take advantage of that and kind of take control of, especially if they get you when you're young, right?
Mm.
Because children are especially susceptible to this. And then, once you've got them when they're young, that's who they are. And so, once you escape that, I feel like it does need to be replaced by something. And it feels like your spiritual journey is a good first step or second step or whatever to that, where, you acknowledge you're a spiritual person,
Mhm.
and maybe these people took advantage of that and abused you, even though like you went in with the best intentions and you thought it was real and true, but they kind of manipulated that spiritual side of you, that person who desires community, desires rituals, desires love. And so they use that as a form of abuse. But once you escape that, you're left with nothing, right? And that sounds
Mm.
like what your book is about, where you're like, well, I'm alone now. Like
Yep.
that side of me got taken out, and so something needs to fill that void. That's good, right? It's not manipulative. And I think harnessing into what your ancestors believed is excellent, whether whether um, whether or not it was something that you believe during your life. It's like, well, this is something that's embedded in me.
Yeah.
It's embedded in my code, more or less. And rituals and spirituality is so powerful that it could literally be in there somewhere, and then
Yeah.
unlocking it with meditation or mushrooms or things like that could be a really interesting technique.
Cool.
If you wouldn't mind, could you talk a little bit about this escaping from this cult? I mean, you don't have to say what it was if you don't want to blast them live or whatever. Maybe you should if they're really bad. But yeah, would you please talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so it was a very culty, cult-like organization. Their name was the Potter's House, CFM. They go by other names as well, especially since a lot of information has been coming out. But they've been in the news since, I mean, when they first began in the 80s, they were all over, with people saying, "Hey, this place did this and this to me," and they were on the news and stuff like that. But they've continued to grow now. They're an international, worldwide organization that works
Wow,
as an MLM, kind of like a pyramid scheme, kind of seeing how like they have to continue to plant babies, they call them, and this is organizations, and then they have to pay back to the main one, and everybody has to do that. So I was in it for 17 and a half years. I was considered a child bride. I went in when I was 16. I was recruited
oh man,
through an event that they do. They do like regular little events that you believe are like helpful, and they just were able to get my information, and then through that information they were able to eventually recruit me, and then find a partner for me in their organization. Then they began to isolate me from my family. By the time I was 17, I was already married into this organization with one of their men. And by the time I was 18, I was already pregnant. Um, and so your purpose as a woman is to have children for them so that it's easier to recruit your own children than it is to recruit
Yeah.
others. And so this actually helps build their foundation and helps them. And they do a very damn well good job because the way that they do it is very successful. They're alive and well to this day, and they're still doing according to them, an amazing job. So, but I was able to wake up and walk out in 2018. But it sounds easy, but it was not easy. It took
No. Yeah.
years, probably about 3 to 5 years for me to finally get the courage to be like, I can do this. And June 2018 is when I walked out, never to return. And a lot of people walk out, but they always come back. Like throughout my 17 and a half years in it, many, 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 many would walk out and say, I'm done with this place. They'd always come back because of the indoctrination and the
Wow.
brainwashing. It's like so fearful. You're so scared like that you're gonna die. Like I really believed that if I left, that I would die or my kids would get cursed with cancer, or I like bad things would happen to me. So literally when I left and I divorced, like they loved the fact that like I divorced, because to them it's like that's a curse. Like if you divorce, it's a curse.
Oh.
So they're like, oh, she's on her way to getting cursed. But I was able to move hours away, and that helped me get away from them, even though their organization is where actually even where I moved to. But because they didn't know me, so they didn't, unless they really know you, then they're not really going to mess with you unless they're trying to recruit you. But at that point, I was already smart enough to know like their tactics. So I was able to get help, and I was able to start a new life on my own with my two kids.
Oh, that's great. So both of those kids were born while you were part of the Potter's house.
Yes.
Oh, okay, and you were able to get out of that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, yeah. Like I was saying, if they get you when you're young, that's when they got you. Because that's when you're the most impressionable, and that's when those neural pathways are being formed, right? And as you said, the once you're out, you probably want to get back in because, like, once those pathways are formed in your brain, they're there, right? And they don't go away ever. And the only way to beat it, as far as like biochemically speaking, is
Mm-hmm.
to make stronger pathways elsewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So rather than, so like, I know they teach this a lot with alcoholics and things where rather than trying to beat alcoholism by like attacking it directly, you do something else.
Mm-hmm.
So you take up mountain climbing or bicycling or something like that. And so when you have those urges, those thoughts, you basically forge a stronger biochemical pathway in your brain. So when you think that, rather than going to that chain and then having it branch out in that dark area, it goes, to the biking or, reading or something like that. And so, and I do believe that we have free will to a point, but in the end, like if those pathways in your brain are formed so deeply, like really deep grooves, and there's this stuff called myosin that forms around it. It's basically like kind of like wiring for um, electrical wires. If it gets really thick, it's really hard to beat. And the only way to beat it is to forge stronger pathways elsewhere. And so I think that's probably what's happening with those people is those cultists. They form those pathways in their brain, and they're really good at it, right? It sounds like they know what they're doing, and if they weren't good at it, then it wouldn't be successful.
Right.
So um, And I think going along with your meditation technique, that's probably what's going on. Is you're kind of forming new pathways, better pathways that kind of tap in with your yourself and who you really are, and not these dark pathways that lead to strange roads that other people have formed for you.
Right. Love that.
Yeah, it's really interesting. So have you worked with a lot of people who have escaped cults, or who are your primary clientele who benefit from this?
I have worked with those. I've actually even worked with people that have escaped the same place I did.
Oh,
Yeah,
perfect. Yeah.
one of my recent ones, she was actually really traumatized by this place, and she found me, and because she knew that I had also left this place, she like was like, "I have to work with you. Like, you're just somebody that I just feel like I really need to, just because you have an understanding of like where we came from." And I didn't know her before. Like, she was from another city and state involved with this organization, and yeah, so our session was extremely powerful. Like, and I didn't like, I know these are all powerful because they're all unique when I have sessions with these people, but it's not till like after, when they start like sending me messages even like weeks after, and like letting me know what has transpired in their life after the session, that makes me really see the power in it. That like, it's not just because you had a session with me, but it's because of like energetically how we were able to get into the body, and like how you said it. I love how you explain all of that scientifically or biologically, whatever. Like, it's
Yeah,
just,
yeah.
I love it because I'm so interested in that as well. And I just love how you explained it because it just makes more sense. But like, I really feel like our bodies are listen to us, and like the cells and the membranes, and they hear us, they listen to us. And I feel like with like this specific client of mine who also escaped this same organization, um her session was a little different like than that I'm accustomed to, because with her it was almost as if I was guided to go into the brain structure
Yeah.
of the what the doctrine had created, like how you said the pathways. And even though I don't understand all of that, like through like the medical terms or whatever, like I knew that something was going on in the brain, and
Yeah.
we were able to go into like the what was going on in the brain. And I have never really done something like that so deep. It was almost as if like her brain had just was like so bruised by
Yeah.
this doctrine that she had just consumed since she was like 7 years old. And here she was, like, I think she was in her 50s now, and she it was like we literally went in there and we're like cleared this some way somehow, I don't know, energetically.
Yeah.
And the messages that I received from her after, she was even going like on her own. She was in this group that we have of with those that have escaped this place, that everybody who shares stories, she literally went on there and was like, oh my gosh, like, even if you don't, because a lot of these people are not spiritual, they don't believe, they're still trying to figure out what they believe in after leaving
Yeah.
a religion. And so there are some people that feel like my work is like not for them because she's weird and she goes into like these, like, I like, they don't want to, I don't
Some
even
kind
know
of
how to.
witch or something. Yeah.
Yes, yes. And
Yeah.
I don't have the right terms. Like, I try to be very gentle with the way that I word it, because I don't want to sound like I'm trying to take over their minds and like trying to do this magic. But with her, she was not spiritual, and she didn't know what she believed in. But after the session with me, she was like discussing with others, like, you may not believe in like what she does, but like there was something happened. Like,
Yeah.
she felt it. And so but I also work with a lot of people who are spiritual. I work
Yeah.
with a lot of those that are like healers in their industry, business. They're doing all kinds of like amazing spiritual work. And they can be on higher levels. Like, they are doing like big stuff, but in the spiritual community. But The reason why they'll connect with me is because they say that I specifically work with the ancestors. And
Yep.
so they like, some of them are like, I've never heard of that. You're the first one that I've heard that goes into the ancestors. Like, what is this? Like, do I need it? Like, is this optional? And I always think, like, especially if you're going into like spirituality, ancestors is at the top of the list because like we said, like, we are who we are because of them. And
Yep.
I do like to mention that when we do the ancestral healings, like my work that I do with clients, I always like to let people know that we don't go into working with the ancestors that they don't want to work with, because I have a lot of clients who are like really eerie about, like, I know what some of my ancestors did. They're historically did things that I'm not okay with and I'm like upset with, and I don't want to work with them, whether it's ancestors historically or ancestors from like your lifetime that have passed away that did, terrible things to you or to others. And I use my ancestral healings go back to the power. So we're going back to like the leaders, the elders, the medicine men, medicine women, whatever it is that your bloodline hosts. We're going back to those that started before the pain, before the trauma, before all of that became intertwined into us. We're going there first because that's who's going to basically come forward. And I've seen it visually, like these very prestigious people who come forward, ancestors. They're not people anymore, but they're spirits.
Right.
Their energy of those power, magic of, and magic, when I talk about magic, it's like, like they do hold this structure in your body that's going to help you have understanding of who you are today. Because like, if you don't understand, and you don't have to understand like who they are, and you may not even care who they were, but the fact is they're going to give you this stability in your mind and your body to help you. And even if it's physical illness, because sometimes I do believe that some of the physical illness that we deal with in this lifetime can be a connection to the stories that they carried in their body that now become stored up in your body. So this is like violations. And for women in the womb area carries a lot of stories from the female lineages, and they will carry that. And this can be like heavy blood periods. This can be all kinds of like ovary problems, cysts. And all of this is like, they don't understand, where like, I don't have anything physically that could create this. I don't understand. And a lot of times in this ancestral healing, these female stories of their lineage, they will see it themselves, like, oh my gosh, like they dealt with like violations and trauma and pain and like genocide. I've had clients who their ancestors came forward and told them the stories of the genocide that they dealt with
They
in other countries.
they got wiped out. Yeah.
And this was still in their bodies, like in the present lifetime, their bodies were carrying their stories because their ancestors didn't have the ability to speak up, or they were wiped out before they could speak up, or they did speak up and nobody believed them, and they went into the other realm without their story being told or believed. And this carries on until somebody believes, until somebody says, you know what, I don't know what happened, but I can feel something in my body that I don't understand, whether it's anger and they're full of rage and they're full of anger, or they're just having terrible pain in a certain area of their body. And it's because a lot of times they're carrying and holding on the stories of these ancestors. And when we go into this ancestral healing, they tell them, they speak to them, they show them, or something happens in the body. And weeks after our session, they will have like aches, or they will have inflammation sometimes in the certain area of their body that their ancestors actually cleared, or began to like clear out that ball of stuck energy that
Yeah.
was. Yeah, I don't know, it's just so
S-
amazing.
Sounds like epigenetics, like the trauma from their lives, or no, it passes on. It really does. Like abuse, alcoholism, drug addiction. A lot of times, that's why children who are born to women who are addicted to drugs, they're addicted to drugs too, because
Mm,
it's imprinted on them. It's not their DNA. It's it's called the epigenome. But yeah, it sounds very it sounds kind of a mix of Eastern philosophy as well, because
Mm.
the Japanese, they have these things called butsudans in their homes. I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with this, but basically they're shrines to their ancestors, and they pray to their ancestors straight up. Like they're
Right.
like, I need guidance, and they'll um, they'll actually put shrines of their ancestors like at the head of their tombos, their rice paddies, so that it'll protect them, and
Okay.
their crops will grow better. And oh yeah, I think there's a concept in pharmacology known as black box, which basically means that we don't know how it works, we just know it does.
Mm.
And so a lot of drugs are that way. Like there's this drug called modafinil, which basically is like a drug to keep you awake, and it helps you focus and that kind of stuff. No idea how it works, but they know that it does. And so with your practice, it sounds like that's probably where you're going to be for a long time. It's like, I don't know how this works, but I've put forward a couple of my theories, where you're probably opening up these different pathways that have been either blocked, or you're blocking pathways that are open which shouldn't be open, right?
Mm.
I think that's what's going on. And they've hooked people up to like MRI machines, where then they'll give them, mushrooms or other
Mm-hmm.
psychotropics, or even mindfulness meditation, and areas of the brain start firing which haven't fired
Mm-hmm.
before. And you can't like cut that person open and and see what's going on. So it's really hard with the brain stuff. It's really hard to get repeatable evidence. A lot of what we know today, actually, the only reason we know it is because it was soldiers coming back from World War II who had like bullets in different parts of their brain or shrapnel or whatever, and be like, oh, that person is really angry now, so that must control anger. Or oh, that person can't speak, so that controls speech, or that. And so like some of this stuff is getting better. Like I said, with MRI machines, you can kind of figure out a little bit what areas are firing, but for the most part, uh, brain research, and until another horrible war breaks out, I guess we're kind of limited as to as to what we can prove and what we can't. But oh, that's really cool. Yeah. Mindfulness meditation is kind of similar along those lines. I'm sure you know that, but where,
Mm-hmm.
and cognitive behavioral therapy as well, where you kind of figure out exactly what's going on in there, and through talking, through feeling. There's another, like, polyvagal theory is another one that I learned about recently, where it's basically you're um, trying to make the person feel safe, and as long as they're not safe, they're going to be locked up, right? And so if you can give them a safe space, and um, talk to them and say, hey, you don't need to be so worried about this all the time, you can kind of be free of this, then you can fix them. But if not, they're totally going to be locked into that. Going back to the war analogy, it's they compare it to somebody who's just gotten shell shocked. So these Marines and things in Vietnam, World War II and World War One, after a big bomb would go off near them, their body would just freeze up, almost like a possum playing dead. Right? It's
Mm-hmm.
basically a defense mechanism where the person just freezes, because the body's like, oh, I'm gonna die, and this is so dangerous, and this is so scary, that my only defense mechanism is to freeze up. And a lot of that gets embedded in our brain and our body. And some people, and sounds like these people in the cult that you helped are maybe along that same line, they're just totally blocked, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
the body's like, I need to defend myself, and I'm in a dangerous world. My whole belief system is shattered. So, and who I am and what I was, everything I knew has fallen apart. And so this is scary. So I'm going to freeze up, you know?
Mm-hmm. That makes
And
sense.
so I think with what you're doing, you're probably helping them feel like, it's okay, and you're opening up the vasculature, not to get too scientific on you, but the blood flow to the brain, certain parts where it's actually working again. And yeah, I think that stuff, it's really hard to um, study, and it's hard to manipulate, but it sounds like you're on the right path where you're actually figuring out how to help these poor people. And it's good that you're trying to do a non um, drug approach, because depending on the person, a lot of that stuff it's too strong, right?
Mm,
I've had friends who they've had mental problems and things like that, and they've done ayahuasca, DMT, and things like that. And uh, what's happening when you do that is I think you're jiggling the wires of reality a
mm,
little bit, where you're like shaking it, right? And sometimes you plug it back in, and sometimes it comes out. And that can be really bad, right? Because you become completely disconnected. And I have some friends in the pharmaceutical industry who are trying to get ketamine and these things approved for mental illness. And I think for some people, it can be really beneficial, right? But for some people, it's going to push them over the edge, because,
mm,
and it does. I've had friends who it's completely messed them up, and who knows if they're going to come back, right?
mm,
And so I think doing something like this, which is just a little bit softer. I mean, I haven't done your experience yet, so maybe it's not as soft as I think. But biochemically messing with somebody is really dangerous. And so I think, sometimes it might be necessary, but I think that if you can do something like this as like a first step, and
mm.
see, hey, maybe this will work, that maybe this will fix it, rather than, pumping people full of whatever drug, I think is a good idea. And then getting people in touch with themselves and their ancestors. I know that's where I go, actually. I go to my ancestors when I'm going through hard times, because I'm like, well, my people crossed the ocean to get over here, and they half of them died trying to get over here, and another half died trying to survive. And then it's like, well, what the challenges that I'm going through are nothing compared to what they went through. So
Mm.
that's somewhere that I naturally go to as well, where I'm like, my ancestors aren't tougher than me. I can I can do this. But
Yeah.
yeah, no, I love your method, and I love what you're doing. I think it definitely taps into a an innate need. And yeah, finding out what our ancestors did, and how they did it, and can really help people be like, well, I'm made of the same stuff. I can do this.
Yeah. And I feel like they give you wisdom too. Like
Yeah.
because you're in a different lifetime than them. So you're in a different timeline. But I feel like their strength, their stories of strength and courage it still lives inside of you, but also like the things that some of them went through that were just so terrible. And I don't believe that I don't believe it dies with you. I don't and even like today, people who go through terrible things and then their life is over. Like I believe that somewhere it has to continue, because there's just no way that this trauma, this explosion of suffering or pain or a story left untold just ends. I just can't see that. And I wouldn't want it to, honestly, because it's just unfair.
Yeah.
And religion, can call it something different, like, oh well, the story continues in heaven or hell. But like for me, I don't believe that. I believe that, like, I believe in like reincarnation, and I do believe in, like, the story has to continue one way or another. And if you're not going to reincarnate, then it's going to go through, if you have children, it's going to come through them, it's going to, or come through other bloodlines that come after you. And I feel like that's where my work comes in, and why it can be so effective, for those that do feel drawn. For those that do feel drawn, it's for a reason and a purpose. So when I get that message from somebody that's like, I don't know why. Like I had this recently. Somebody I don't know just finds me and they're just like, they send me a message and they're like, I don't know why, but I know that I need to do this with you
Yeah.
and this healing. But like, I feel like that's why it's so effective is because like we're all a body. Like we all have a body. If you have a body, like this can work for you. Just because you have a body, period. Like that alone is going to do something because whether it just gives you, whether it just helps you, like I say, like sometimes this can be beneficial for those that are like in business and they're like, I'm stuck, like I feel stuck in my business, I feel like my ideas have run out, my creativity is at a standstill. For them, I'm like, this can help you with bringing up a creation that you may have that's stuck in your body, that will come up to the surface and be like revived and or refreshed, or like there's something in there for you as well. And I think that that's why it's effective for the most part, is that you're, again, because it's leaning into those who came before you
Yeah.
that may have carried some kind of like messages that are for you, that are going to be beneficial for you, whether it's business, whether it's healing, whether it's for trauma, whether it's to like up level in your life, or like speaking up about something. I feel like it's all connected to those that came before you, and your message that you're speaking today is somehow intertwined with them. Like whoever you are, there's something that you're doing, or there's something that you're saying, or there's something that you want to do that somehow is connected to those who came before you. And this can be hundreds and thousands of years ago. Those even still speak through. I feel like they're still alive through us. And some of them want their story to be told. And I feel like, I know this may be like off topic, but I feel like sometimes that's probably why some people like become activists for like something that they may not have even went through, and they're like, I have a passion for this and I don't know why. Maybe one of your ancestors dealt with that or went through that trauma or violation, and
Yeah.
here you are passionate about something that you may not even have like a connection with personally. And it could be because their story is wanting to be like spoken up through you.
Yeah. 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 I mean, not to sound like a broken record, but it could be like an epigenetic thing where, you've got that trauma still in you, and it's like, well, I gotta get this out of my bloodline,
Yes,
let me,
yes.
let me clear this out. Or like, my ancestors were passionate about this, and so
Yeah.
it's still in me, bouncing around somewhere,
Yes.
and so I need to go in there and carry the banner. Now, I think I hope a lot of this stuff comes out where you can kind of prove it, but this stuff is so so deep in there that it's going to be really hard. And part of part of it, though, like I maybe as I'm getting older, I'm a more spiritual person, but I almost feel like some of this stuff, like, you almost should leave it alone, as far as like proving it or not. Like it's part of, not the magic, but the mystery, as well as like working things out on your own without this heavy-handed science or whatever. Because
Mm.
science isn't necessarily always right. They try their best or whatever, but I feel some of this stuff, it's in the metaphysical world, and I think it maybe needs to stay there, um, because we're spiritual creatures, and I feel like we're not robots, and so some of this stuff, um, it needs to kind of stay there and kind of um, help us figure things out on our own. Maybe that's what God is. It's the unspoken, the undiscovered, and
Mm.
the mystery in there
Yeah.
that we need to kind of push ourselves forward without being just so um, empirical about everything. Even though that is the title of my podcast, I think that I think there's a balance, where it's like, there's things that um, we need to we need to kind of keep personal, and it's spiritual. That's that's my
Yeah.
theory anyway.
Yeah, it really like if it makes sense to you, right? Like
Yeah,
sometimes it makes sense to you and it's giving you benefits and it's and others feel it too, though, and I think that speaks for itself too when you have others that they're like, what, you seem different, or you seem more open or more awakened, or that open-minded, or there's something going on in you, and other people can see that and feel that. I think that
Yeah.
that speaks for itself too. Like, that's
Yeah.
feel like that's evidence.
I agree. Yeah, I did a lot of work on cells and actually animals as
Love
well
it.
during my PhD, and I actually feel bad about that. But anyway, moving forward, it was amazing how unique every batch of cells I would cook up, or every mouse, every primate, like even if they were like inbred copies, they're still so unique. They would die of
Mhm.
different things. They had different personalities, all this stuff. And so, and that's why biology a lot of times is so difficult, because natural selection has made variety, and there's so much variety. We're all so unique, and something that works for some person um, is not going to work for another person. And at the same time, like, people are like, well, what you're doing, that didn't help me. It must be nonsense. Like, this is
Mhm.
bogus. But you're probably very different than that person, and so you don't know what helps that person, what their epigenetics are, what who they are, that kind of stuff. And so I feel like with a lot of this wellness and spiritual stuff, everybody is unique. And I think um, going along the lines of cells and people and all that stuff, like when I would do an experiment one day, the next day it would be different. And so even the same person, at different times in their lives, different things are beneficial. So let alone different people, it could even be the same person. you know so biology is so tricky and so finicky, and you just don't know what's going to help someone and what's not. And so that's my theory on a lot of these spiritual practices, is that depending on the person, um, some things could be extremely beneficial, and then you could bring someone else in, whether it's like a sound bath or
Mhm.
some other therapy, and they're like, wow, this is a bunch of nonsense. Like, these people are all crazy.
Mhm.
But they're not crazy. They're different, and it benefits them. And just because it doesn't benefit you doesn't mean it's not true and it's not real to them. So
Yeah.
I hope I got the point across. I
Mhm.
kind of rambled a bit there, um, but yeah, I think that's getting close to the hour. It's been really great to speak with you. Is there anything else you'd like to leave on?
I love how you talk about the cells, though. Just FYI, because I absolutely have,
Yeah,
because I'm literally working. It's so weird. I'm working on a course right now that is going to help. I'm researching how the cells work in different illnesses, so
oh
that I can, with a spiritual approach, speak it to an individual cell by name or hormone, or and speak to them by name to get them to basically function properly, to help to bring healing.
yeah,
And I've actually done a little bit on myself, and I've done a little bit of practice phasing on like two people, and it has been working, which is really
really,
weird. It's
that's so
really
cool.
weird. It's so
Yeah.
weird. But so when you talk about cells, like, my body lights up, because I love I love talking about cells.
That's the direction you're going to. Yeah, yeah. No,
I just want to say that. Sorry.
no, that's fine. Yeah, no, that's really interesting. No, I'm a big believer in the meta organism. And what that is basically like, we've all kind of connected through uh through the internet, through society and all that. And so now we're all kind of cells in this giant body.
Hmm.
And I found that people who are on similar paths, they're kind of doing similar things, and we're kind of on the same frequency, and we're almost becoming
Yeah.
similar cells or whatever. And I think with your treatment, what happens with a lot of cells is, if they're kind of left alone, they enter into something called senescence, and they age and they die.
Mm,
But with people, but with cells that have like nearby cells to communicate with them, um, they keep dividing and they stay alive and they keep going, right? But
Mm,
they need that other cell next to them to talk to them, like through they're called cytokines, but basically they're communicating and they're like, hey, keep going, buddy, you're good. And I
mm,
think that's happens with people too. And I think we're all just one big body together, and we're all kind of cells in this giant body. And by talking to somebody and communicating with them and saying, hey, you're all right, keep going,
mm,
it's very similar to what happens in the body where, like if a cell is, gets cut off from its group or whatever, it ages and it dies. And so it needs other cells around it to kind of talk to it, communicate it, help it grow.
mm,
And I think that's how we are. Like, we've gotten to the point where we're just this giant body. We're all different cells in this giant body. And by communicating with each other and helping each other and talking to each other, we're kind of keeping that cell alive, and not letting it
mm.
fade and die, and kind of like an ember that's gotten kicked out of the fire or something. It'll die off if it
Yeah.
doesn't have the warmth of the others. And that seems to be the case. People get, if they get isolated, they get real weird real fast. So
Right. Yeah, I like
um
that.
yeah, yeah,
I like
I don't
that.
know, it's just my philosophy, and it helps me think that it helps me help people, when I see like, oh, they're isolated, I'm like, oh, I know what's going to happen, if they
Mm,
don't get invited, or um if they're left to themselves, bad things are going to happen. And if I'm communicating this positive energy, this positive
mm,
vibe, it's just like cells in a body, it lifts them up, and then we're all part of this organism together, and it'll
yeah.
help them grow and become who they're capable of being,
Yeah, and I think
so
that also like meeting different people helps as well, because and it makes it healthier, because like in when you were talking about that, I was thinking about like when I was in this cult like organization, we all thought the same, we all did the
yeah.
same things, we weren't allowed to go outside of that structural organization, whether it was even like for therapy and stuff, like everything had to be done in house. And like I just think about that because it's like we weren't really allowed to meet new people unless we were recruiting them. So, like, and it makes sense because then we're all going to think the same, and you're not
Yeah,
allowed to have like meeting new people, right? Like meeting you, hearing who you are, and like, and hearing you talk. And it's like, oh, like there are things that I'm like, oh, cool. Like, it makes sense. Or like,
yeah,
and I feel like does that even creates new pathways? Would it?
yeah. Oh, for sure. Yeah, talking with other people, fresh
Yeah.
perspectives. Yeah, traveling, I know, is supposed to help with that too. But yeah, I don't know too much about the culture you're in, but it sounds more like a cancer than a body part. Like, it sounds
Yeah.
like, because that happens too. I mean, I'm so involved in biology. Maybe I lean a little bit too much into the analogies, but no, it sounds like a cancer, because that's what happens with cancers, right? Like, it's this mass that grows, and it's basically becomes detrimental to the body at large, and it starts, feeding off of it, and um,
Mm,
making, dividing and making. Sounds like that's kind of what happens with why it wants to make a bunch of babies, is because
mm,
it's this cancer
makes
that's
sense.
growing, and it's completely gone off the path. But it grows and it survives just like a cancer does, by doing these bad things. So, and there's a
Yeah.
lot of those out there. But
Yeah.
eventually they usually work themselves out. The body at large eventually destroys it, but in one form or another. So
Yeah, and then or one leaves it and is like,
yeah,
got it. So the
yeah,
others can see, like, yeah, yeah, I guess
yeah.
you're right.
The main organism that is basically makes it realize that that's probably not how you're supposed to be as a cell. Not supposed to be this cancerous
Mm-hmm.
problem.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, thank you so much, Mandy. I've really, really enjoyed talking with you. This was great.
yeah. Thank you so much for having me here.
Oh, for sure. And yeah, you can find her website, divinemandyoracle.com. And the book is When I Feel Alone.
Mm-hmm.
Correct?
Yes, awesome. Thank you so.
Okay, great. Hey, thank you so much. And hopefully talk to you again soon.
Yeah, of course.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.